Good evening and welcome to India Today NE. 9 months have passed by, yet Manipur continues to burn. What began with the opposition to the ST status by the Meiteis has since then taken up different hues such as poppy cultivation, illegal immigration, demand for separate administration, and scores of people becoming displaced in their own state. As per statistic, 200 killed, 1,000 injured, and 60,000 rendered homeless between May and August last year. Even the state police and the armed force remained mute spectators as people were at each other's throat. Such was the situation that during the initial days when I was in the state to cover the violence, the wide gap and distrust between the Meiteis and the Kukis was evident as I saw houses of Meiteis in Kuki dominated areas had been marked and vice versa was done for the Kuki houses in Meitei dominated areas. Such a prolonged ethnic conflict leading to collapse of law and order has brought forth questions on the activities of fringe groups on both sides who have been adding fuel to the fire. Manipur's problem has been the serious shortage of land in the valley and the developmental neglect of the hill areas. The state constitutes a fertile bowl shaped valley surrounded by hills. While the Manipur Valley holds 10% of the state land, it is a home to 70% of the population, primarily Meiteis. The hill areas, on the other hand, constitute 90% of the state territories occupied by the Nagas and the Kukis, along with some other small tribal groups who make up 30% of the state population. They have been protected by special laws that ensure tribal customary rights and prevention of land transfer to the non tribals. Keeping this in mind, it is a high time to seek a solution to this long going cycle of violence. What can be the way out? What can be the best way to bring in peace while meeting the minimum demands of both the sides? Can there be a way to ensure an end to this cycle of violence and let normalcy return to Manipur? Can there be a way to give some form of autonomy to the tribals without compromising Manipur's territorial integrity? Today, for the first time, both the communities have come together for a live show ever since the crisis began. To discuss this issue, I have with me two representatives from the Meiteis and the Kuki communities. From the Meitei side, I have Professor Bimal Akoizam, who is a professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, who is a prominent voice from Meitei community. From the Kuki side, joining today is a Kham Swang Housing, professor at the University of Hyderabad, one of the strongest voices from the Kukis. Before I start, I would like to request both our guests, let us have a good and healthy discussion and not indulge in a debate which has become the norm with media nowadays. Let us have a discussion where we can strive to achieve a solution to the ongoing crisis so that peace and normalcy can return to Manipur and people can stop suffering. And also to the people who are watching us live, you go to our live X handle and leave your questions in the comment section, which we can ask to our panelists today. So, welcome to our show, sir.
It's my
So, my
pleasure.
first question to you both, start with Vimal, sir, that I'm given to understand that you both know each other very well. Well, there are was there any incident or any issues earlier that you had a big difference or disagreement, or in other words, you to really have the mindset of what we have seen today between the Meitei and the Kuki? I won't say hatred, rather I would say different way of thinking about Manipur. Start with Bimal sir.
Yeah, I know Swan in terms of age and career. He is younger to me, so to speak. I've seen their generation as student. He was one of the very bright students from our state, which I keep on saying to many people. Their generation was people like me just happened to be here, but these their generation was far more smarter than people like me. I just happened to be there at the beginning. That's why I used to represent not only my home state, but whatever happens in the Northeast. I used to be very outspoken in issues on, what the gender related issues about the Northeast girls and women in India and the rest of the country, issues on APSPA or issues of that kind. I was very vocal about it. In that sense, on this issue that has afflicted my home state, I do differ with Swan on many of the issues. In fact, when you introduce me as representative of the Meiteis, even I would take it with a little cautious because I don't speak for the Meiteis as such. I speak for the idea of a united Manipur, and my position has been consistent for not only this time but for decades, and I still hold on to that idea. And I also do not share certain belief with my some of my fellow community members. For instance, you will hear from me saying something like Meiteis need to reinvent themselves. As a community, you can't live with what I call it imperial nostalgia of what has happened in the past, the glorious time of the past. Those are our heritage, but we cannot live with that standard because, after all, we are in a modern democratic and republican ethos, and we need to reinvent ourselves. So, in that sense, I have to introduce myself as someone who stands for the dignity and the well-being of the people of the state, irrespective of their communities. In that sense, I consider some of the projects. Sometimes what Swan, people like Swan argues, not all the things that he argues on. Some of the things I do differ in that sense. There should be also, he has certain concerns that can be talked about. We can always have a conversation and see where we stand. And I, for one, would insist, Afida, people like you, your what I call it, unlike my tribe called academics, your tribe called journalists are also squarely responsible in some sense of what has happened. Because in a study that I've carried out with a team of young research assistants over the months, what I've discovered is that this problem was aggravated due to something very unfortunate, and at times I could even call it appalling, behavior of some of the media houses. Their coverage, their conduct is against the standards set up by the Press Council of India. We have that one; it will be widely available now. All of us, it's not only for the two communities in the state, but everybody in this country, every professions must look within themselves and see
Right.
what's going on, because this is unprecedented in this country. You are almost watching something like what had happened in Rwanda, for example,
Right,
or
sir.
in some
So I will
banana
come
region.
back to you. I will
What
come
we
back to you.
we are experiencing it. So my request is, when you do that, you are being cautious, which is good. But I think we should have this capacity to engage in a conversations without indulging in tutu meme kind of a style. That's
Right.
my initial remark.
Right. Khan sir. Khan sir. What is your
Uh,
take? How long you
yeah,
know Vimal sir?
I think I know Bimol for quite some time. I think we met personally around 2006 when I made one of my presentation in the Center for Historical Studies, and that was on the Hills Valley Divide, apparently, which happens to be one of the major contribution that I made on understanding the Hills Valley Divide in Manipur. So since then, we have been, rubbing shoulders in some of these seminars, talks, or other academic engagements. So I hold Bimol in high regards in terms of his felicity of language and his ability to articulate some of the very distressing and disturbing developments, issues on a wide range of topics, afflicting not only Manipur but also in other parts of India. And as he said, I share some of the concerns, but I also do not always agree with some of the finer points that Bimol has, especially on this current violence, for example. So we do have our own difference, but as academics, we are entitled to our perspective, our economic vantage point of looking at issues, and I think that ought to be there and that should be encouraged because we do not need a monochromatic, view of things which are very complex as well as very multi-layered. So in that sense, I think different perspective of looking at and trying to make sense of some of these very complex and very pertinent issues are very much appreciated and should be encouraged in the long run.
Okay. So my actually first question to you guys is now. So what according to you is at the root of the current violence in Manipur? Bimal sir, first.
We can look at a couple of issues which has a historical background to it. The evolution of the Manipur as a geopolitical entity from being a monarchical state to a shift to a republican and democratic form of consciousness. Uh, Unfortunately, Manipur did not have that experiment in the post colonial period. It did not last. That capacity to conceptualize a notion of we the people of this state, not as a subject of a ruler, but as a right-bearing citizens coming together to form the idea of the people, which was experimented in 1948 after a long, roughly a decade struggle against the then king. We had adopted a constitutions in 1947, and there was an assembly. The head of the assembly, the speaker, was from the Meitei community. And that sense of what I would consider as a modern sense of we-ness based on the liberal principle and our capacity to relate to each other on that basis, on that perspective. That was like most colonized society in our post-colonial experience. We were developing that way of understanding each other as right-bearing citizens coming together for a common good. That did not last. It was barely 11 months, and it's a unique experience in some sense. You must also note this, that you know uh, post-colonial period is something that where the self-rule matters. We are supposed to rule. So Manipur did not have that. After that experiment was sort of subverted, we were under Delhi's direct rule for almost 23 years. Ruled by chief commissioners and lieutenant governor and the governor and so on. So basically, a democratic way of engaging with each other, resolving differences, and developing a sense of we-ness under the modern principles and ideas was not flowered, so to speak. And I think that is one of the historical baggage we have. What I am saying is that since we did not have that one, and neither there is a king, so what happened is that there is a fragments already in this state on various layers. There are layers of fragments. And what you get to see is a reflection of that fragment. This fragment was part colonial baggage and part post colonial, and it was sort of aggravated and exploited by the competitive democratic politics, by the elites. And I hold it as a major reasons for that. Instead of resolving these, fighting against distrust and building bridges, these politicians and elites have always harped on these differences, what Sigmund Freud would call it, narcissism of this small difference, and that has been sort of blown out of proportions over the years. This is one of the major reasons for this conflict, and the second aspect would be that there are grievances, either real or perceived, by various communities that they do not get their dues. And unfortunately, this again has not been addressed in an objective, rational fashion. There is a communalization of the discourse, and instead of looking at objective factors like what is factors associated with the planning model, the neo-patrimonial structures of the system, and the demographic roles and the role of the terrain or topography. Everything has been blamed on community and this community and that community, forgetting that people suffer from many communities in this development, and there are what I would consider it as an unreasonable way of looking at things. This could have been resolved in a much more. So that's the second. The third one is based on these things, we should also know that Manipur has been a theater of armed conflict, particularly in the hill areas, since the mid 50s onwards, a spillover from the what had happened in the then Naga hills of Assam. So it has been a theater of conflict. So and then the in the mid 60s onwards, this has sort of expanded to other areas of the state. So we have been deeply into this armed conflict situation, and many of these fractured nature of our polity and society is also manufactured as a part of that armed conflict, particularly by the Indian state as part of their counterinsurgency strategies. So that has aggravated these fault lines. Last but not the least is the complete unaccountability and of the governance, the elite sharing the spoil of the state, those people who get access to the wealth and the power of the state from whichever community they exploited. And I was saying it, and then people have been sort of exploited on this in order to maintain their access to this wealth and power of the state. And my suspicion is that some of the elites of certain communities also trying to get a direct access to the wealth directly from Delhi, because much of this wealth flows from Delhi to this state. So instead of mediating through Imphal, some people are also trying to get a direct access by popping up certain administrative structures and demand, rather than looking at a common good for such a small and compact state like this, like Manipur, whose population, effectively is like a district population in Delhi, for instance. So these are some of the factors that have led, and as a part of that exploitations, certain false and antithetical ideas of the each other's each community, that has also been propagated over the years. These are broadly the issues that I will see as factors implicated in this conflict.
Okay, okay, sir. So, coming back to again, Khamsa, what is your take on it? What according to you, is at the root of this current violence in Manipur? Your take on this, Khamsa.
I think one of the major causes of this violence is the discomfort with and the attempt to short circuit accommodationist institution in a deeply pillarized society like Manipur. And that's precisely what I think is at the heart of this violence, precisely because when you have the rise of a political dispensation which is majoritarian and integrationist, which is particularly discomfortable with the idea of accepting as well as acknowledging deep diversities of historical, existence as a separate political entity. Remember that the idea of Manipur is a culmination of a constructed political entity, which in effect merged, hitherto disparate territories into a united Manipur through colonial as well as post-colonial intervention. So to that extent, I think given that you have separate set of accommodationist institution, both for the hills as well as for the valley areas, and the fact that over time the rise of a political dispensation which is totally discomfort with these institutions by short-circuiting the accommodation institution, in effect, is largely at the heart of this crisis. That's one. The second part, I think, is has to do with the idea of the kind of unsettled state society relation in a deeply divided society like Manipur, when the state does not exercise an autonomy or an infrastructural power to regulate societal conflicts in ways which in effect adheres to the minimal principle of the rule of law, for example, equality before the law or equal protection of the law, which you see in ample evidence there, given that the partition nature of the state, response in terms of a set of a set of violent incidents in the course of these 9 months, you'd see that the trust and legitimacy of the state, in effect, gets erode over time. And the result of is that when the state, in effect, does not, represent, the population in terms of legitimate aspirations and demands, which can be processed through democratic, constitutional, as well as legal principles, then you have this chasm between societies. And when this intersocietal relationship become violently brutal, then you need an objective, neutral, as well as even-handed state, which somehow is conspicuous by its absence in the case of Manipur now. And I think which is also largely responsible for spawning this violence. The third, I think, is a mixture of three set of factors which in the literature on conflict studies are quite evident, which is the intermixing of the greed, grievance, as well as relative deprivation, which Bimol also talks about. Because given that the state institutions, in effect, are characterized by different layers of democratic deficit, and this democratic deficit is a phenomenon which is characterized not only in the hill areas but also in the valley areas. You have enough opportunities whereby civil societies or vigilante groups could use that as a ruse to embark upon what Bimol calls it as communal politics. And in the lack of this democratic legitimacy or democratic accountability as well as responsiveness, which in effect could constitutionally as well as democratically process this set of demands, then you have these spillover effects, and the result of which is that when the state has not been able to exercise its autonomous infrastructure powers in ways it regulate without capitulating to this powerful social force, you have possibilities of instability as well as constitutional breakdown. That's another. So on the other side, also you also have a kind of a phenomenon, a change in the political economy in Manipur, and for that matter, in other parts of Northeast India, whereby the region is increasingly being transformed into a site of extractive economic zones. And remember that this is a zone which capitalists, not only from within the state, but also from outside, not only other parts of Northeast, but also outside India and other parts of the world, are interested in making or in harvesting, the dividends that abundant deposit of resource would, accrue to them. And this is where I think some of these elites, both local as well as national elites, in effect, would determine ways which in effect is not always respectful of accommodative institutions, especially on issues of tribal land ownership, for example, because they would see this as a major stumbling block in, forestalling their greed to kind of extract resources from not only in Manipur but in other parts of Northeast India, and that in effect would be used as a very fertile ground to kind of foment conflict as well as restiveness in order to settle scores in their own vested political or economic interest. That's another thing. But what is also at issue and at stake is the issue of relative deprivation, both at the valley areas as well as in the hill areas, which accumulated over time. And these, in effect, unless they are democratically as well as constitutionally addressed, you have possibilities of violent, slowdown at one stage of time. So I think it's a complex combination of a set of factors which lie at the heart of this current violence.
So, okay. So you agree, Vimal sir? You agree to this point regarding this capitalist interest in Manipur
Yeah,
and all?
I think it, broadly that is one of the regions that I've been saying it. But in Manipur, this has been communalized, unfortunately. For example, the extractive economy of the neoliberal political economic thrust of the global capital. This is sweeping across the region. I see during this particular conflict that as if it is the Meitei who is trying to exploit. In
Hmm.
fact, I must share with you that is the last point I was hinting at is the position that Swan is taking. If you really think about what he calls as integrationists, majoritarians, which it may have an element of truth when you say about majority, and if you think that Meitei must be the mainstream kind of thing, which I don't quite agree with that kind of a position, even as a Meitei. But I think it is absolutely unacceptable to call the entire community and the entire political project in Manipur as majoritarian. If you think it is integrationist, the opposite of integrationist would be disintegrationist and sectarian forces, which is the term that I often use. Manipur is under threat, not by the majoritarian politics, but by the disintegrationist and sectarian forces, which tend to communalize the entire debate of development issues or otherwise. That is what I have already flagged off. There is a question of relative deprivation. That is what I said, either perceived or real grievances. But these grievances can be addressed in a rational and objective manner. And that has never been done. In fact, I have lobbied with two consecutive chief ministers to launch something like such a committee to map out the socioeconomic status of various communities in the state, and if the nature of the development in different areas, if there is any differential development, what are the bottlenecks and how to correct it. To just this kind of an objective and a rational discourse is something that the sectarian and divisive forces in the state tend to communalize and blame on Meiteis. I'll give you one classic example that you can always refer back to some of the news, opinion pieces and so on. There is this idea that this particular government has been branded as a Meitei government, declaring a lot of forests as protected and reserve forests, and many swath of areas have been declared, tribal areas within court, as wetland and so on and so forth. This is written in national paper, which is
Hmm.
factually incorrect, which is, in fact, it's a blatant lie, because the much of the protected forests and reserve forests were done before Manipur even were become a state or have its own government. It's just much of them were in before 1966. In fact, the last one which was declared is the Nomai Jing Ching is on the eastern Imphal East, which is done in 1990. And there is not a single place which has been declared as wetland in Manipur under 2017 rules, including Loktak. Many activists, Meiteis, have been demanding that these wetland must be declared under that wetland laws. Nothing has been done, but some of these tribal elites and politicians have been preaching and misleading these poor villagers as if forests have been declared by this government to usurp tribal lands and wetlands have been declared, which is absolutely a lie. You can always check it factually. And this kind of communalization of discourse doesn't help. Fact of the matter is, if there is perceived or real grievances in this country, just as we have such a committee kind of a thing, nobody demands. Why? Because you have this a myth and factually incorrect information to villainize some community, to create certain sectarian projects, and that is my major problem with the kind of articulation which even Swan tend to do it at times, which is unfortunate. And you can always cross check whether when was the last time this declaration of the reserve forest or protected forest was done, and when was this wetland 2017 rules. Why is that Manipur environmental activists have been demanding that Loktak should be declared as a wetland, and why the government still refuses it? I know these are some of the issues that I think. But lastly, what I consider as our problem is that when I agree with this idea of the extracted economy, my idea has been, I've been articulating this, instead of wasting our energies on this false dichotomies and inter-community relationship, it's high time that these small communities in the Northeast must see and mobilize themselves how to protect from these larger global capital forces hand in glove with the political elites drawn from various communities instead of communalizing these discourses all the time. And that would be my position. Otherwise, broadly, I agree with this extractive economy. In fact, some people even call me alarmist when I say if you look 50 years down the line, you will have a lot of mineral and water resources being exploited by these global forces in order to protect these economic assets. You might have militarization vis-a-vis the geopolitics of the Chinese, and new alignments have been done between United States, India, and Israel. The Northeast could be something like Cebu in Philippines, or Okinawa in Japan, deeply militarized, and our societies, smaller communities could be uprooted. This common ground and common good has never been flagged off, unfortunately, by the sectarian politics. And that's my major grievances against these ideas. Otherwise, anything, any injustice done to any communities, be it in terms of economic development or otherwise their rights, people like me are ready to join the fight, but not on basis of false information and sectarian ideologies. That's what I would say.
Swansa, you want to add on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I must, because Bimol takes my name, which I think is very unfair. Because if you look at the writings, I think I concentrated my writings around some of the recent, act of this present regime in terms of nullifying, some of these complaints, and the attempt by the current dispensation to, for example, to nullify the objections by the assistant settlement officer on Churachandpur Khokum protected forest, for example, which Bimol rightly, as well as partially stated, that was met before Manipur came as a full state in 1966. But if you look at carefully the specifics of such details, you'll find that these are constitutional as well as procedural issues, not just communal issues. And to impugn communal motifs to constitutional as well as procedural issues, I think is off color in this particular aspect. Because if you see the declaration of a particular chunk of area around 499 square kilometers in Churachandpur district as a protected forest, before the declaration, a particular area has to be acquired, and that certain procedure has to be followed. But in this case, when the review was made between 1966 and 1988, by the assistant settlement officer, 38 villages which are in effect having grievances against such declaration, in effect make their representation out of which 24 villages objection were admitted by the assistant settlement officer. And this regime, in effect, simply nullified on the contention that the assistant settlement officer did not have the sanction of the government, which it considered it as required in order to nullify, the points that it met. So in that sense, the point largely is this, that I think there has been a lot of generalized debate as well as narrative which is built, which is not very well informed by what actually transpired on the ground. I'm privy to the cabinet meetings on this, which I'm not sure whether Bimol has a hold of this. And these are not communal issues. These are issues of constitutional, legal, as well as procedural issues, which the Hill Areas Committee, for example, in March 2021, in effect explicitly stated that any scheduled matters, which is, protected forests including, have to be vetted before the Hill Areas Committee, which is required by a statutory order that was passed in 1972. And when there is a deliberate attempt to float such type of, procedural requirements, the Hill people who are affected by such high-handedness would obviously raise objection, which need not necessarily be seen as a sectarian or a communal politics.
Anyways,
So please understand these dynamics. So I think, therefore, the public at large should, in effect, weigh the kind of sources that they have access to, and before they make very over generalized projection as well as narrative. And we should be sensitive to the legal as well as procedural requirements of the law, and which have to be upheld by any government, whatever dispensation they holds.
Okay, so let us move to another
I
questions
just
because I
wanted,
have.
I just wanted to add one. This is not a debate. This is it's a
Yeah,
it's
no,
a
no, no. Let's.
factual
This is not a
one.
debate. This is a discussion.
No, no, no.
That's why
Let
I
me.
am
I
moving to
think
the other
what
other
he
question.
said. No, no, no. Just a small correction that I need to do with two quick point. He has raised this issue of assistant settlement officer who was deputed and who has sort of sanctioned these 35 villages. He is right. It is a matter of procedures and established rules. But the rule says that assistant settlement officers is not mandated. He doesn't have the authority to issue such kind of order. That's the first point. Second, does this mean that the government do away with his order, and how the government has done is a very separate matter. But I want to factually correct first that the argument is, legally speaking, assistant settlement officers is not authorized to do that, is a legal and procedurally fact. But how the government reverses the decision of an incorrect or exercise of power by a particular person is a matter of another debate. We should not mix up the two. The
Yeah,
last
yeah, yeah.
point is, whatever the schedule areas question that he has raised, let's not getting confused. Indian Forest Act of 1927 has been enforced much before HAC comes, and much of the declarations of the forest, I have said, was done before the ICAC comes into the picture. So let's not conflate it, as he said, a general statement on these issues. But there are issues where the government actions can be questioned, and we can debate on whether they should have been more tactful and considerate in doing certain kind of thing. That's a very separate issues
So there
where
are
I
many
will not
issues to be
necessarily
addressed,
take.
sir. No, 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 sir. I will not continue with this because it will be
Afrida, very
otherwise.
briefly, Afrida,
No, no,
very
no, sir.
briefly, because there
It
seems
will
to
be again a
be
debate. So please
no,
avoid
there
it.
seems to be a
Please
conflict
avoid
because you
it.
see, for solution, I think we really need to,
No, but
confront
in a very short,
complexity of.
in a very
It should
brief.
be, it should be short. I mean, you see, Bimol seems to be confused because you see, protected reserve forest, in effect, is within the ambit of the state government. And the protected forest comes within the ambit of Hill Areas Committee. And this is precisely where issues of legal as well as procedure issues rise, right? Had it been for reserve forest, that's a different matter. But in Churachandpur Hopum protected forest, because it is within the schedule matter, it's not schedule areas, it's schedule matters within the Hill Areas, order of 19, committee order of 1972, that the matter has to be necessarily vetted to the Hill Areas Committee, which is a statutory committee mandated by the constitutional provision. So I
But
think
why? Declaration was
let us
done
not,
before
no,
ITC
let
Let us
us,
comes.
not.
That's what I'm
Let us
saying.
not
but
debate on
still,
this.
Why you are
but
reviewing it retrospectively?
no,
That's
no,
what I
no,
am saying.
Bimol. You see, the confusion is that this review happened much after, between 1966 to 1988, which is post, the establishment of the state of Manipur. And I think, in that sense, the ambit of or the remit of the Hill Areas Committee still run large, because these are issues which, in effect, also implicate the statutory roles and responsibilities of the Hill Areas Committee, because
So
it's
I
not
have many
just in the
questions to
1960s,
ask.
but
So
extend
we
till
can't stuck in
1988.
one
But there
question.
are
We
other
can't get
issues
stuck in
anyway.
one question. So I have
Yeah.
many questions to cover, sir.
Yeah,
Please
yes,
move
yes.
on. Please move on. Yeah. So now my second question is the why the administration has failed to put an end to it even after 9 months from both of you. Whoever wants to address first. Vimal sir.
Yeah, that is one of my grievances. I have been saying it from the day one. When I appeared on national media, I have said the state should have reigned in this violence. If you see my first interview that I gave to a national media, in that interview itself in May, I said, even if the violence was started somewhere in Torbung areas or in Churachandpur, you should not have allowed that kind of a violence, even if it is retaliation, if you call it. You should not have allowed it to happen. It should have been raining. Is something you can always go back and check it. This you have raised a fundamental question. I have been saying it, that the state has failed, but this again has been communalized in terms of Meitei government, Manipur state, and I have been saying that Right now, if we investigate, I have raised this issue with who is in charge of the law and order situation in the state of Manipur. If you really look at law and order, it is there in the official document. Law and order and security is coordinated for efficient and effective dealing of these issues by these unified headquarters. This has been done by a particular bureaucrat. It is no longer under the chief ministers. Removal and transfer of officials, there are certain things we know from the ground. Is the chief minister is able to exercise or have a free hand in these matters? I'm not very sure. You are a journalist, please look into it. I don't want to spill over here on the media, but fundamentally I have asked who is in charge of law and order situation in Manipur. Let's remember, Union Home Minister said that the CM is cooperating. What does this mean? Is the removal of the DZ and appointment of new DZ, all these things are done by the Manipur cabinet, or is it behaving under the order or the command of the government in Delhi? We are not very sure. These are matters to be investigated. The abject failure of the state, for me, must be shared. But I said, doesn't matter. It is the same party, the government of India will not have allowed these things to happen. I have been saying this right from the day one. A civil war-like situation where you are supposed to monopolize the legitimate use of physical force as a state, you have not done it. This has been allowed to go on. You see, and the institution like police have been completely destroyed, and in national security agencies under the union government has also been suspected. And the fact that despite all this pumping in of these armed forces, the violence continues. So it's just quite obvious that there's an abject failure of the state. But unfortunately, this again has been communalized. Meitei police, Meitei commando, and so forth. Rather than looking at the fact that the police from Champur is being accused by many Meiteis of firing at the Meiteis. The police have been communalized and destroyed as an institution. And the army even was sought to be communalized by saying there's so-and-so officer is coming from this community or that community, which is something that the army as an institution doesn't allow. So unfortunately, you see that institutions have been sort of jeopardized. And this has been allowed rather than asking fundamental questions. You go as a journalist and find it out whether how much is the state cabinet has a power over the law and order situation. Look at that. He sent some bus. I'll give you latest example in the recent time. The Assam Rifle objected, but you have a unified headquarter, and the CRPF says we will not move from this further. State cabinet and the chief minister is a constitutional authority, and the CM is saying something, and CRP says we are not going to follow it. Assam Rifle said we are not going to follow it. So what has been happening in this state?
So it's
Who
a
is
complete
disrupting
failure.
this constitutional authority? So I think you are right that there is an abject failure of the state, but I'm repeating it again. Instead of communalizing this discourse, one should be worried about the delegitimization of institutions like the police, the army, the paramilitary forces, and constitutional authority. Whoever is there, is the chief ministers, the cabinet, the union minister, that read of the state must be there in that state, but we haven't seen that. And I'm saying that there's nothing to be talk in terms of this community or that community. This is a national issue. This is a constitutional authority. These are institutional questions. We have not raised these issues, unfortunately. You can see this. That's my only grievances. Otherwise, the state has completely failed. I have no doubt about it. And when I say state, it is according to Article 12 of the Indian Constitution. Do not communalize it as a Meitei government or this government or state or thing. Please look at how Article 355 has been flagged off and how on the ground things have been implemented. I've given you examples where the authority of the CM ends.
Okay. Okay. Sir, Swan sir.
I think, yeah, Professor Bimol has rightly pointed that very well. And I think, the dilemma that we face is that there is a problematic division of labor between the chief minister and the unified security command, as it were, which in effect is not sanctioned either by law or by the constitution, because without formal proclamation of Article 355, or for that matter, President's ruled, the onus is on the state government to, in effect, regulate law and order, because order, after all, is a state subject. It's a different matter that if the Ministry of Home Affairs think that the Chief Minister is cooperating in ways which, in effect, ensures effective enforcement of constitutional provisions, then that's really, really a sorry state of affairs that obtain, despite dispatch as well as massive deployment of 60,000 odd extra paramilitary force in the state. If you cannot possibly stem violence, which could otherwise have been, prevented just within a matter of a fortnight, and the fact that this has been allowed to continue tells very, very, is a very bad commentary on the state of India's security apparatus, and it's actually a shame that a mighty Indian state has to falter and fails to protect citizens' right across the divide.
Okay. So my next question to you is Vimal sir. Sir, there is an allegation that Meitei Vigilante group, such as Arambai Tangal and Meitei Lepun, have got involved in the violence. Questions were raised about the role of Merapaipis as well. What is your take on this?
Afrida, you must accept one thing. When things collapsed in the then East Pakistan, the then Prime Minister said, then don't expect me to be a silent spectator. Don't expect India to be a silent spectator. That the civil war situation in the then East Pakistan was a concern, even though it was a foreign country. Manipur has been experiencing, you can see pictures. It can only be seen in civil war. And we have seen this in Rwanda, we have seen this in Yugoslavia, we have seen this in the then East Pakistan. The fact of the matter is, when we say the Indian state has failed to rein in, in one of my interviews recently in Manipur, I said, you must differentiate between inability versus unwillingness to act. It is not the inability of the Indian state, it is the unwillingness of the Indian state. In Manipuri, we said Taudaba versus Ngamdaba. This is not Ngamdaba, it is Taudaba. It is the unwillingness part. Why do I say this as an answer to your question? Is that when a civil war like situation, everybody gets involved and there is no holy cows. But unfortunately, you only have a lens of looking at one community because it serves a particular sectarian discourses. The same thing happens in the hills. Many of the national medias have been playing games by saying that we have a devil burial and so on. Look at the kind of weapons that have been there. Looting doesn't happen only in the valley, it happened over in the hills. In fact, the first looting of the gun shop happens not in Imphal, it happened in Churanchampur in the afternoon of the 3rd of May. This is a fact. I'm not accusing by this the Kukis, but I'm only stating a fact. The first looting of weapons happened in Churanchampur in the afternoon of the 3rd May. And looting of government weapons, though major chunk happens, much of the weapons in terms of the numbers may be more in the valley, but it is not only the valley, but national media will not be doing it. This has been the thing. So what I'm saying is that do not paint. We have a civil war-like situation. Everybody is armed. Everybody is implicated in this violence. So by tarnishing the image of one community, picking up one or two organizations from one community will not help. The fact of the matter is that India has allowed a civil war-like situation in their 19th state of the union for more
Yeah.
than 9 months. That's a
Yeah.
fact. For me, I will refuse to communalize the discourse. Everybody gets involved, and this has been allowed to happen. Indian states is not unable, it is unwilling to act. That's
Okay.
my way of looking at this issue.
Yeah. So, as Bimal sir has alleged, and it has been there has been so many reports that there was weapons looting in Churachandpur during the beginning of the violence in May, and then it was further reported that weapons looting has been followed in the valley as well. The question now is that where are cookies obtaining such advanced weaponry as evidence in lots of videos? And also, there are reports that the cookie militants group from the Sioux camps and across the borders are involved in the violence. Don't you think that these things are making worse? Swansa.
Uh, I think let us have a very nuanced take on issues such as this, because it is good to make comparison and to cast the blame on one side of the divide, and let us also not compare oranges and apples, because in terms of the numbers and the intensity of the dangers that the looting of arms, which I don't call it as looting, it is handing over, because the police, in fact, on either side had to cave into powerful societal force on both sides. But in terms of the trade that taking over of arms and the extensive participation of proscribed terrorist organization in the valley areas, and for that matter armed organization in the hill areas, and effect is it is understatement, because they have posed and render the security scenario much more precarious. And this become particularly evident because Manipur, as you know, is sitting on the threshold of what they call the golden triangle, where you have a slash of guns, drugs, and all kind of things available on very very readily as well as easily. So just to say that one side of the divide have easier access to such weaponry is an understatement of the serious scale of the excess that the other side has. And I think in that sense, the Indian state fully knows through its military intelligence or intelligence bureau inputs from the field, which side of the divide pose a far more grave threat to the national security. Look at the number of security personnel kills over time in the last 20 years. Which side of the divide, has taken the maximum toll of Indian security force? And which side of the divide had been napped the most in this cycle of violence for over 9 years. So there are extensive reports of the involvement of proscribed terrorist organization, and let us not conflate this proscribed terrorist organization, which are proscribed under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act by the Union Ministry of Home Affairs, and underground or armed militia groups which entered into suspension of arranged agreement with the government of India. And now that there is a lot of talk about the imperative of withdrawing, given the complaint that some of these groups are involved in this violent cycle of violence, that's altogether different matter. But in terms of the scale and intensity of the threat posed by each side of the divide, I think intelligent people should be knowing, and they should be wary of the asymmetrical threats that each of these armed organization in both side of the divide pose to national security.
But both of you
May I
will
say
agree that
something?
one, sir, both
May I
of
say
you will
something?
agree. Yeah, yeah, go on.
I just wanted to add something. One thing you should remember. I think what Swan is saying is factually right, but I think it's putting the facts out of context. The armed political groups who have been fighting with the Indian state for what they call the restoration of sovereignty has been going on for decades. So the casualties has been on both sides of this conflict. But unlike that, many of these armed groups of the Kukis were not fighting the Indian army the way these people have been fighting. So then you must ask the questions, what has been the role of these groups in the entire armed conflict scenario over the decades, and how this suspension of operation was done? But these issues are completely separate at one level from what's
Correct.
going on right at the moment.
Right.
I'm only
Correct.
saying that the violence, because I have already set up, we are witnessing a conflict in already an area which is an armed conflict situation in the border of this country. We know this. That's why things get complicated. There are counterinsurgency measures which has encouraged these fragmentations all the more. And this has been written by well-known journalists and authors, about how these Sioux groups have been utilized as an instrument of counterinsurgency. Look at Subir Vomik's work on that one. So we
Okay.
all know this, but that's a separate issue that don't get mixed up with what is going on. What I'm only saying is that state has allowed these situations of people taking up arms and privatization of the violence, where the state is supposed to monopolize this violence, has not happened. It should not be about orange and apple. This is a clean fact of the violence being allowed Let's not try to play, I am more innocent or you are more innocent. That kind of game will not help. The state must rein in. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we will get distracted all the more again. The state
Yeah.
must rein in is the fact that we
Okay.
must accept.
So, but you both will agree that one big issue is the proliferation of arms, particularly those looted arms from the state armory. Do you see any solution without recovering all these arms?
Should I take it first?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, you can take it first. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is understood. I've already said the state must monopolize the legitimate use of physical force. Otherwise, if we don't have a state, we live in a Hobbesian world, which is unacceptable. No society can survive. So in that phase, when I say the state must rein in and in its read must work, instead of playing games. I think that the statement is already implicated in what I have said.
Yeah. And Swansa?
Yeah, yeah. I also do think that the state has to have that coercive monopoly of power, but in terms of the extent and degree of the ability or capacity of the state of Manipur, and for that matter the Indian state, to reign in this armed militia group across the divide, I think is deeply problematic and very precarious as it were, because in the wake of this violence you have armed toting militia groups in the valley areas as well as in the hills, who are given the full power to dictate even the terms of the decisions that the political class make. And I think this is totally unacceptable, because the implication of this on the legitimacy of the Indian state is severely cast under doubt, the evidence of which was fully evident before the public on 24th January in Kangla Fort, when the Arambai Tengol, in fact, under coercion, in effect, dictate terms to the 39 lawmakers in the valley areas to kind of vouch for a very sectarian communal agenda, which in effect deepened, the divide between the hill as well as the valley area. So I think to the extent that the state tolerates and allows these arms to be freely available as well as to be easily used in this violence, I do not see any closer to this violence anytime soon.
Yeah. So my next question too is to Bimal sir. Sir, is it possible? I'm coming to the poppy cultivation now. So, is it possible for a village chief to engage in a poppy cultivation on acres of land without the influence of bureaucratic and political patronage, even though the practice has been practiced for a long time in the hills, as per lots of reports? Where was the government when this was happening? Or did they only find out the poppy cultivation in the acres of land in April 2023? I will come back to Swansa later in this.
Frida, one thing is that, globally, even in some of the UN reports, we have seen that this issue of drug, the areas have shifted, from the golden crescents to the golden triangle, the prominence of that one. And it has been, over the years, it's been coming towards the border side. And Manipur has been experiencing these things for years. And it has become a big issue. Uh, you know, uh, the shift of the drug issues globally from the Afghanistan side to the Burmese side. So since we are at the border, we getting affected should not come as a surprise. And two, these things cannot be individual affairs, and I suspect that this must be quite understandably an organized cartel sort of an involvement, and powerful people who may from various communities or nationalities are implicated in this game is something that I would venture to speculate. And to that extent, you are right. This has been there, but we must see a global, dimensions to this problem as well. It's not merely local. And that's the thing that I would like to emphasize. And the state has been monitoring this, and the present government has been on its mission. They have launched a mission called War Against Drug. So it has been doing it, but of course we can also have a discussion on whether how genuinely or how effective this war has been. That's a different issues. But the fact of the matter is, the state government has been on a war to fight against this menace of the drug. And not only, even the productions, I was told when I from the ground when I interviewed people, is been there in Manipur as well. Now we're not simply planting and transporting the product; we're also manufacturing within the state. So this is a serious issue, that it has a global dimension, that it is an organized one, and everybody gets implicated. But unfortunately, this happens to be an area where predominantly these Kuki people live. It has been a concern. But I
Yeah,
would, for
you can't
one, will
disagree.
not
You are
like
not
to
disagreeing.
blame the ordinary Kuki villagers as such for this. That's what I wanted to make it very clear on this. That's why I said there's a global dimension, there's an organized one, even though unfortunately these areas in the border areas, is a major chunk of this was under one community. But I think by that, blaming the villagers would, to my mind, as far as I'm concerned, I do not agree with this one. I will be cautious not to blame the villagers for this.
But will you agree to the point that the various stakeholders are there? Maybe the Meiteis are part of it.
No, you
Maybe
don't
the
need to mention. I said that this is a larger forces. Even in fact, the people from our state might even be a minor players. People from the neighboring countries, Myanmar could be a major king players. That's the kind of a situation. So I will not bring in terms of quite obviously when I say people who are powerful are involved and from any communities, it's quite possible. But when I say there's a global dimensions, please understand that the UN has already flagged off these issues.
right. Coming back to the Swansa, the chief minister says that the violence was instigated by those who were affected by the government's drive against poppy cultivation and forest encroachment. And it is a persecution. Is it and Cookie is a Cookie dub it as a persecution of the community. But Meiteis have been affected by such drives too. What is your take on this? And how do you see the issue of illegal immigration from Myanmar?
Let me come to the last question, and then maybe possibly try to answer the question that you asked in the beginning. On the issue of illegal immigrants, I think there is a lot of disproportionate attention to the this bogey of illegal immigrants. The state cabinet subcommittee itself established in April 2023 that hardly around 2,000 illegal immigrants were detected thanks to the coup and the population displacement, who in effect fled out of the war zones in neighboring Myanmar. So one of the things that make more precarious issues of cross-border migration is the fact that Manipur is a contiguous cultural area with Myanmar, and given the fact that the Zhou people, which I would prefer over the Kuki in terms of the Chin Kuki, Lusai combination, we would locally prefer to call it as the Zhou. In effect, have this humanitarian gesture to give accommodation to people who are adversely affected either by natural calamity or in war times, and to kind of impugn motifs that this unnatural flow population out of war, in effect, pose a demographic threat to demographic stability in Manipur is a bit far-fetched. And I think this is precisely where some of this vigilante group based in the valley communalize it and use in order to kind of provide rational and justification for their sectarian politics, which is very, very unfortunate. Because if you compare the scale of border crossing in neighboring state like Mizoram, over 40,000 in effect have migrated, and there is no demographic threat whatsoever that the people felt, because they feel that it is a part of the humanitarian duty to extend such type of humanitarian gesture to give shelter to people who are aggrieved and who are desperate in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. What is problematic, therefore, is that India seriously have to rethink in terms of its refusal to be a signatory to the UN Convention on the Refugee, 1951, because until and unless India also accept the principle of refoulement, of legalizing, or maybe by identifying through legal measures temporary shelters, giving temporary shelters and rehabilitation, and once the situation improves, send it back to them, which is a part of humanitarian commitment that India, in effect, as a member of International Committee of Nations, is morally as well as ethically obligated to. I think that need not be stretched any further. But I think this is a very lopsided and disproportionate way of putting the things, because if you compare with Mizoram, the scale and intensity of migration is inconsequential. The second part is in terms of what is the question on the question of eviction as well as encroachment. The issue again has to be nuanced in the sense that one of the common refrain of these powers that be or the political dispensation is that why is it that when simultaneous eviction drives are made against encroachment in the hills as well as in the valley areas, why should people in the hill communities communalize the whole thing? And such type of generalized statement or generalized kind of attempt to kind of impugn motives a particular community flies off the face of procedural complexity which is at place at the local context. Remember that the hill and the valley areas are governed by distinctive or disparate set of laws. And in this set of laws, for example, in the hill areas, if a particular land has to be acquired and an eviction drive has to be taken, you have to follow certain established procedure. The point in contention, therefore, is that when these procedures are not followed and flouted with high-handed, or what the hill communities would call it as lawless law enforcement, you have antagonistic political resolve to resist such type of high-handedness. And I think in that sense, let us nuance that distinctive set of laws governed the hills and the valleys. And in terms of eviction drives, I think proper procedure has to be followed. And unless these procedures are followed, not to expect that there will be resistance and opposition from the hill areas would be naived as well as insensitive to the ways in which legal pluralism works in distinctive local dynamics.
But you agree to the point that the illegal immigration is there, Swansa.
Illegal immigration, in the sense, obviously there is, and that's precisely what also happened not just in Manipur but also in Myanmar. Remember that thanks to the coup in February 2021, we have massive displacement as well as dislocation of people, because you have a veritable reign of terror unleashed in the neighboring district in Myanmar. And as population fled, they would obviously be called illegal immigrants, because India, in effect, is not a signatory to the UN Convention on Refugee, right? And therefore, one of the ways that we can do is to take them as illegal immigrants, as it were. But one of the ways, one of the feasible as well as humanitarian approach to such unusual phenomenon would be to legally identify, which the Cabinet Subcommittee in Manipur tried to do in April 2023. Put them in temporary shelter, and once the warlike scenario in effect disappears, send them back. There is no opposition as such to such type of drive, but it's said. But when you try to lampoon the whole community, stereotype, and overgeneralize and target the whole Kuki or Zo community as if they are all illegal immigrants, then in effect the partition attitude as well as response of the state become very stark and unacceptable.
But I just like to add one question, Swansa,
Okay.
that we have one letter with us, which was written by the Secretary of Government of India to the Chief Secretary of Manipur, questioning the citizenship of Thang Liang Pao, who is now the president of Jomi Reunification Organization and now resident of Surachandpur since the year 1995. Investigation is still pending and he now dictates the political decision, as you can see a letter to the Amit Shah as well. But what is your take on this?
You see, the whole question of citizenship is fraught in communal sectarian politics in Manipur, very unfortunately. If you look closely at the clause, which govern Indian citizenship law, Article 5 to 11 of India's constitution, a person who is born within the territory of India defined under Government of India Act 1935 are entitled either by birth or by lineage, because either one of their parents is born within the territory of India, they are entitled to citizen. So if this type of allegation is true on face value, for example, if you accept on face value, the very fact that Thang Lien Pao, and in fact, the allegation has it that he was a Myanmarese, without actually detailing the villages where he was born. In fact, there is a counter narrative, the counter fact, which in effect is provided by the organization that Thang Lien Pao in fact was born within the village of India on the outskirts of India Myanmar border. And by birth, he's an Indian citizen, but it's a different matter that he migrated to Myanmar and subsequently come back to India. And in that sense, it's a complicated matter. I think without capturing this complex nuance of citizenship discourse, it is very easy to target and castigate a particular individual for that type of targeting. There is also an internal dynamics to it, which I do not want to kind of reveal here. So it's a complex, a very deeply contested narrative in Manipur, which in effect is now used, for example, to even doubt my even citizenship, right? So I think there is a lot of ignorance on the terms of citizenship discourse in the Indian subcontinent. I think people should be, kind of given more awareness about the regime of Indian citizenship in order to avoid, some of these very, very embittered, public discourse, which is unsavory at times.
This question is to both
May
of
I,
you.
I just
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to add something. Okay,
Yeah,
may
yeah.
I, Fidli? See, I think, there are a couple of issues which we need to address as a part of dealing with the crisis that we have in Manipur is the question of illegal immigrations. That's a very central question. We must not criticize this. But what I see as a problem is that there is a porous border and free movement has happened. This has happened in the Western sector and even in the Eastern sector. The 1965 war and 1971 war has changed the dynamics a little. These are some of the regimes that have been in the post-colonial period we have. So it's a movement of people from back and forth. One of the curious things that why I said the question of illegal immigration must be handled is because what has fueled this suspicions that there are a lot of people is there a disproportionate increase in the villages and the populations and MLAs and so on. Besides, I think what we have seen is that there seems to be a justification of these incoming populations to be absorbed in the Indian side among certain sections of these Kuki communities. I'll cite one article, a report filed in the Where and in September 2016, where one gentleman was quoted by the reporter. I was the one who filed the story in the Where. It is available online. You can check it, and it says that that's the one educationist has candidly admitted that there are people coming in from Myanmar side, and he started saying why it shouldn't be because they are come from the same linguistic, same cultural, same tribal lineages. Why we can't accept this artificial boundary and so on. So there is a conflation between ethnicity and the citizenship. And this justificatory mode that we find among certain sections of the population, among the Kukis in Manipur, has sort of fueled the suspicion all the more, besides the increase in the village and the shift in the electoral political dynamics and so on. And there are certain statistical things. So I think there is an effort to cross-check this. one should not conflate citizenship with ethnicity, which is a tendency is there among certain section among the cookies. And I've already told you this example of the story in the where. And as a part of this, what we need to understand is there is a certain need to distinguish the citizens and the non-citizens. So this is a very curious case. When the tribes in the northern part of Manipur support NRC, why is that the cookies have objected to this?
I will
If
come to
it is
this
an
point.
anti-tribal move, why is it the cookies have always been sensitive to any move to distinguish citizens from non-citizens? Over and above the one I have given you the example of admitting that why shouldn't they come? We are of the same people and so on. So remember that in terms of the number, a few thousands increase creates a havoc because the population of Manipur is very small. The electoral dynamics can change with an increase of 1,000 people in the constituencies. So when you talk about thousands or 1 lakhs or 2 3 lakhs, it creates a massive shift. So my only thing is that this suspicions that there are illegal immigration must be addressed, and that's why when NRC is suggested, it has more complications in terms of the procedures part of that. That's also something that we must look into. But what I'm saying is that this tendency to justify non-citizens on the basis of ethnicity to be absorbed, which is something that Mizorams do not do it. I think Mizorams are very clear about who is a refugees and who is not. Even people holding Aadhaar card, they will up against that one. Though they will have the hospitality as a kinship structures or similarity in culture, ethnic background, and so on. But they are very clear about who is a citizen, who is a Mizoram citizen, who is not. But in Manipur, there seems to be a tendency to, justify the absorptions of these people. And I'm not saying from my side, this is the justification given by the Kuki, gentleman in that article, and certain other factors. So the idea is to do a gentle, a very sensitive NRC must be conducted, and this is something that one must be pushing for it, but not as I think I fully with Suwan. I do not like all my fellow citizens to be called illegal immigrants. I have been maintaining this position for a long, long time. But I do not like people to conflate ethnicity with citizenship and justifies the flaws of illegal immigration simply because they share the same ethnicity and so on. So even the objection against the border fencing and FMR, there is an element of that one. I understand that modern nation state is very brutal to our traditional life forms. But having said this, as long as we accept nation state and citizenship as a concept, you don't bring every Bengalis from Bangladesh simply because it's the same ethnic group. You don't bring all Punjabis from Lahore to this side of the border. The ethnicity doesn't mean that everybody should be allowed and absorbed here. And I think this should be very clear in our sense. So I would simply suggest, as I maintain, that calling all my fellow citizens as illegal immigrants is something that I do not agree. But at the same time, the kind of on the ground, the increase in the disproportionate increase in the villages and so on, I think there is a requirement for us, and I think it is in the benefit of everybody, including the people, the citizen, our Indian citizen cookies in the state of Manipur. It is in their benefit also to distinguish this non-citizen and citizenship. And as for the other aspects that, very quickly, I just want to add 2 sentences. This I when I said there are global elements from the neighboring state in the drug. Many people suspect that they are financing this conflict because the state is on a war against these cultivations, and I think that is also something that we must carefully maintain. It's an issue of national security. In that is something that we must keep in mind when we deal it. Our neighboring country is very unstable, and their civil war has been going on, and it will definitely have a spillover, and this migration pattern has to be checked. But I am still warning that one should not be calling every citizen as illegal immigrants. But at the same time, one should be honest enough to accept that there are flows of populations, and then certain sections in the Kuki communities are justifying this in the name of similar ethnicity. That is unacceptable, as long as we have to maintain the idea of a citizenship and a non-citizenship. That is something that I would place it on
Kwanzaa,
record.
I would like to add one question to you before you answer. So I would
Yes.
like to add one question. You can answer in the same. It is related to FMR only. So do you not believe that FMR turned into a free passage for the drug trafficking, illegal immigration, and the smuggling of weapons? And as rightly pointed out by Bimal sir, that except for the cookies, the Meiteis, Nagas, and the Pangals are demanding the NRC. Why not Kuki?
Okay. I
If
think we have.
viewers wants your answer.
Yeah, I think on the issue of FMR, you see, when India has this profess neighbor first policy as the foundational pillar of India's look east policy, which has now become India's act east policy, erecting artificial borders across 300 odd kilometers along the India Myanmar border in Manipur on the southern tip, and that runs through Mizoram as well as Nagaland, is I think a very bad intent as well as impractical policy, precisely because it in effect totally unravels India's commitment to neighborhood first. So, in that sense, it is a very retrogressive policy which goes against the grain of neighborhood policy. And practical experience, not just in India, in other parts in the Northwest, but also other parts of Northeast India, but also in Europe and US, for example. The US, despite the fact that it is a superpower, has been under Donald Trump zealously trying to manage this artificial border along the Mexican border, is an abject failure. So in that sense, border fencing might cater to the political economy demands of some of these capitalists, or the political bureaucratic criminal nexus, but it certainly in effect does not take off on the ground, because it in effect hinders kind of population flows across, in terms of not only in terms of health, but also having adverse implication on economic activities across the border, which is against the very idea of India's neighborhood first. On the question of NRC, and let us also try to look at the context in which they are. I would say that there are concerns, not in the first place, total opposition to the idea of NRC. Look at, for example, the RTI file by one Sarat Chandra in 2015, and the response of the state of Manipur, that using 1951 as a template to decide the timeline of who is indigenous to Manipur, and by that implication, who should be rightful bearers of citizenship rights. And in fact, this is deeply problematic, because the state government precisely do not have, database as such. 1951, that's in the records. And when the state itself does not have a record and preemptively declare before it undertake NRC, for example, the recent statement from the highest, political office of the state, that whoever is, identified to have migrated into Manipur after 1961 would be deported. I think you see the intent itself is deeply suspicious, right? So you predetermine before actual NRC begins who are the suspected victims of this, which in effect is unduly targeted at the Kuki communities. So to that extent, that's unrealistic. On the political economy side of NRC, why should we be so invested in the idea of NRC when we know, for example, in Assam, for example, between September 2013 and 2019, under the Supreme Court monitored, NRC undertaking, you have, a totally unsuccessful attempt to kind of detect, who are illegal immigrants. When the state in Assam, and for that matter other parts of India, has not been able to effectively detect how many aliens or foreigners are, how how would India, in fact, Manipur, which is economically starved, look at, for example, the budgetary allocation of Manipur. In Manipur, budget is around 35,000 crore rupees, right? And the fiscal deficit is something like 8,000, 800, not 8,000, 850 something crore rupees. So if Assam spent something like 1,600 crores and employed something like 50,000 of its employee for almost a period of 6 years, and has not been successfully detecting, who are illegal immigrants. Will it not be unnecessary drain of resources and a misplaced, political agenda, which in effect is already conclusive of who the targets are? I think in that sense, I think the onus, for example, is on the state to in effect develop its capacity to identify who are rightful citizens without mixing up, who are indigenous as well as who are citizens, rightful citizens, because looks like vigilante organization based in the valleys are now so much invested in this idea of who are indigenous to Manipur, and using that indigeneity as a foundation to create and construct, who is a rightful citizen of India. You cannot have, India does not have double citizenship. The type of citizenship regime in Manipur has to conform with the national, regime on citizenship, right, which I already spelled out between Article 5 and 11, which is very clear. And you cannot invoke a problematic timeline to perpetually castigate and stereotype a particular community as illegal immigrants all the time. And I think this is a problem that has to be dissected. And Zetition, as Bimol rightly pointed out, you have to be clear about not mixing up citizen and non-citizens, and not mixing up citizens and indigenous community in Manipur, because the terms of citizenship are quite clear. In Manipur, cannot, and it is constitutionally against the provision of the constitution to come up with alternative regime of citizenship rights, which I think is not acceptable. As the eminent expert Niraja Gopal Zayal, who also happens to be my teacher at JNU, in one of our intervention has rightly called that such type of miscalculated attempts amounts to allowing the elephant to kind of crush the ant, and in fact torturing the elephant to do this, so which is a futile process, as the case of Assam pointed out. Instead of fulfilling its political project of castigating entire majority of the Muslim population as illegal immigrants, substantial segment of the Adivasi groups as well as Assamese in effect are caught in the crossfire. And the result is that the BJP government, which with full enthusiasm began this process, now totally disown it, which essentially means that NRC is a deeply problematic and inefficacious political exercise, which is counterproductive, which in effect disorient the priority of the state to something which is deeply political and contentious.
Okay, so this question is to both of you. The ST status has become the bone of contention between the two communities. What is the way forward from both of you? Bimal sir.
This again here, one must continue. I mean, this has. I am trying to delineate these, range of issues. What I am saying is just as I said, one should not be, justifying illegal immigrants in the name of ethnicity. One should be very careful about how to deal with refugees, since, as he rightly pointed out, we don't have that regime. But there is a need to deal with refugees, but refugees should not be conflated with, again, illegal immigrations. And the illegal immigrants and citizenship should not be justified, conflation justified in the name of sharing same ethnic lineage and so on. And so that's my concern. And my concern is also the fact that this concern for increase of the population, there's at least a suspicion, and I have given you these examples of this one has been implicated in this. So there has to be a very sensitive way of dealing with this question of illegal immigration. We cannot brush it aside, and it must be carried out as a part of finding a solution. And my argument is that even the citizen cookies themselves, it is in their benefit, instead of constantly justifying this conflation of the illegal immigrants in the name of similar ethnicity, one should be very careful that it will harm their collective existence as a state, as a community. So, therefore, my suggestion is that this issue of illegal immigration must be addressed. There can be modalities, experience from Assam and Bengal. We can learn it, NRC, how, in what way we can do it. But I still hold that there is a need to address this question of illegal immigrations in the state of Manipur. As far your question on ST, I think this is also a way of rationally talk it out between these communities. There's a legal measure. One doesn't have to resort to violence in the name of ST. Just as the forest and procedural things, you don't need to indulge in violence. You could have gone to the court to challenge the decision of the government rather than turning into a violence on the street. There are ways to handle it. So there are more complicated issues in our state. It can be talked over the table. What are the concerns? What are the apprehensions of the various communities? Why some people are demanding and why some people are objecting? We can talk it out. But remember that even in Nagaland, you have advanced tribe and the minor tribe, the backward tribe and so on. So SD doesn't necessarily mean, going to usurp everything and so forth. On the other hand, as a community living together, if you do not understand each other's anxieties and aspirations, there is no way that you can progress further. So the question of Meitei is demanding ST must be understood by the other communities, why these people are demanding, and painting them as a part of another narrative of Meitei hegemonic dominance and so on. I don't quite buy that argument. This is building up on the suspicions rather than trying to understand each other. And similarly, the people who are demanding ST must also understand why there is an anxiety and among certain communities in this state. They must sit over the table and talk it out about what and wherefore of these issues and what are the way ahead, and building up and consolidating these distorted narratives on development and usurping of land and so on and so forth doesn't help. No one will get benefit out of this. And Meiteis have their own concerns and anxieties, and it must be understood. And similarly, why the others, communities are anxious about this move. But again, here is Afrida. I keep on asking this. Just as about NRCs, as you rightly pointed out, Pangals and the Nagas and other tribes and Meiteis will demand, Kuki will object. And then STs, again, is a concern of all the ST communities in the state, the present ST communities, but the violence erupted in Churachandpur and Kuki areas rather than those other areas where the rallies have happened. These are some of the curious, factors that by this, again, it is not to sort of blame on the communities per se, but it is only an indication to certain kind of politics and certain kind of aspiration and anxiety. I'm just pointing this out in order to tap on these things and address in the peaceful, democratic fashions. That's the way I think the Meitei's ST demand has. Otherwise, a lot of false narrative and disinformation has done. What the court has suggested has been overdue. It said, whether you want to recommend or not, just send reply at least. That's one of the reading. The wording is a little difficult, and some lawyers friend of mine has pointed it out. But what the court has said is not to grant, but only said, you respond to the letter sent by the union government. There should be an ethnographic and socio-economic data to justify or not justify this demand. The state must supply, and studies should be carried out whether this demand for the Meitei is legitimate or not. Just send your recommendation. Is it legitimate or not? But some
Yeah.
people have just taken it as an excuse by saying that court has suggested to recommend the inclusion of the Meitei, which is not, court can't even do that. There are procedures. So, the tragedy in Manipur, Afida, is that there are a lot of disinformation. There is, people are thriving on suspicions. My suggestion is that however complicated the issue is, you try to understand each other and talk it out. But I think this demonization of the communities, and by the way, this is again, tribals have been demonized, Kukis have been demonized, and I've been saying this on national media. The Meiteis have been demonized much, much earlier and decades for decade, as if they are responsible for the whatever is the differential development, perceived or real one. Meitei is this, Meitei is that, and all that on the site of I have recordings. This has been produced in academic circle, political circle, and even in religious gathering. It's not only about spiritualism. It is about Meiteis and so forth being preached. So Meiteis have been demonized, and this time based on lot of false information and disinformation. And I have said it: declaration of the forest to usurp tribal land, wetland declaration where there was none wetland declared by the state government till date. And then similarly, the forests which have been declared much earlier, before Manipur had a government, and you calling this communal government. Look at this Kuki MLAs and cabinet. I was told that they're still clearing the files online. Why don't they take sides with their communities and resign? Who's playing the game? And they're clearing the files, and you are calling it as a communal government, where the ministers themselves are still clearing files. What kind of a double standard is this? You
Yeah,
understand
Swansa,
what I'm saying?
your reaction on that, and also on the take on the ST status.
I think the issue on the ST is on even keel now, given that the Supreme Court has, not the Supreme Court, has, make it very clear in one of the oral intervention by the Chief Justice of India that, the prerogative of who should be granted a scheduled tribe rests not with the court, but with the President of India. And that has to follow established procedure. So in the case of Manipur, a given community can only be accorded recognition not just by the strength of the cabinet resolution. It has to be first vet to the Hill Areas Committee, and the Hill Areas Committee would eventually vet the matter to the cabinet, and that's how a decision is made and sent to the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, which then send a matter to Registrar General of India, and the matter got vetted to National Commission for Scheduled Tribe and back forth to MOTA, which eventually passed if the final procedural requirements are met. So I think in that sense, the Meitei section of the Meitei demand for scheduled tribe has to follow certain established procedure, and it is for the President of India to determine whether a particular community eventually merits scheduled tribe recognition. So I would not quarrel with that procedure at all, which is well established, and there are a set of criteria which the National Commission for Scheduled Tribe has laid over the years in the 1950s, eventually culminating in the B.N. Lukur Commission report in the 1960s, which laid down a set of criteria for determining who should be given or accorded recognition under Scheduled Tribe label, which is backwardness, shyness from contact, so and so forth, right? Which has to be determined as to whether the Meiteis who are in demand of scheduled tribe meet this criteria. So that's, I think I'll leave it to the wisdom of the President of India to determine that. On the question of demonization, I think Bimol has been, asking a very relevant question as to why this violence, in effect, broke out in Churachandpur. Why is it that? And that is precisely one of the major differences that I have with Bimol, because he seems to suggest that the violence was calibrated by the tribal elites from Churachandpur itself, which the evidence that I get from the ground suggests otherwise. Because why should the Kuki Zomi communities in Churachandpur or Lamka be selectively targeted and waylaid, and which escalated that confrontation into the subsequent burning of some houses in Kangwai, which in effect also got mired in a series of disinformation campaign, including the rape of 30 odd nursing student from the valley areas in Churachandpur Medical College, which is used as a ruse to kind of incite some of these majoritarian minded integrationist elements in the valley areas to use that to launch a very aggressive and brutal attack against some of these Kuki villages. And you know the mass parading of naked parade of the Kuki women, which came viral in July, right? And which, in effect, perforce the Prime Minister of India, who otherwise had been reticent all this time, to speak in condemnation of that particular unacceptable grisly incident. So, to that extent, I think we should ask a pertinent question. We should ask, why is it that certain political as well as economic elite in the state, both in the hills as well as in the valleys, find it lucrative to invest in violence
So
and to soften this
I'd like
over
to
time.
request both of you to answer in a very brief, because my time is going out and I have two questions left with me still.
Afrida,
So
just
that's the
just
thing.
one small correction. I think Swan said something like, if the Meitei's demand for ST must go through the HAC, I think it is legally, it's not required. It's not. I see it's not to be consulted. It's not a scheduled matter. It is a very separate issues. I leave it to the judgment of the legal expert and constitutional expert on this.
Yeah.
On that, I just wanted to make this
So
point.
my last question to you,
And as for
I
the
have
origin of the
two questions.
violence,
I
also,
have
I'm
two
not going
more
to enter
questions that
into
you
it
need to
because
address.
that will go into another set of debate
No, no,
about
no.
who
Yeah,
started it. I have already said it from the day one. The fact
yeah.
remains that violence started in Torbung and Churachandpur area. That is something that how it began. The inquiry must will reveal. But we have enough documents how the initial period misinformation and disinformation was indulged, and to blame Meiteis as things which is against the established journalistic ethos. And it's a propagandist sort of a thing. Unfortunately, even the body like Editor Gill has indulged in it, which is factually. There was a study I would love to share with you. We'll be
So,
releasing this.
it's one. My major
So I'm not
question has
going
been
to
left.
into who started it.
Sir, this is to
Yes, please.
Swan, sir. The cookies are demanding a separate state or administration. I'd like to you to answer in a brief. The cookies are demanding a separate state or administration. In 2019, also cookies have demanded separate state and carried out a protest in Jantar Mantar. And it has been said that till yesterday you are blaming Nagas and now the Meiteis. Can't there be any solution? And given that Naga also claims their settlement in the hill areas such as Kankopi, Chandel, Tengopal, Chenapati, and there is a significant overlap in the demand for cookie land. How are you going to handle this?
I think I had written on this as well in one of the pieces that I wrote in the Hindu, where I suggest a combination of territorial as well as non-territorial solution. In fact, one of the glaring weakness of present institutional arrangement in Manipur is that it is not accommodative, right? It requires that the shared element of self-rule has not been adequately paid attention to, and that's precisely where I suggest that in some of these districts where you have intermixing of populations, there has to be more explicit terms of accommodating a distinctive community, so that you do not have the contentious politics spilling over to kind of propel another bout of inter-ethnic tension as well as conflict in the long run. So I think I'm quite clear on that, and the relations that is drawn from the present crisis is that we unless we accept the pillarized, deeply divided nature of segmented societies in Manipur, given that now you have the development of ethnic core regions in Manipur, right, which is very sharpened as a result of this violence. And I say that there is this institutional pedigree in December 2016 when the districts of Manipur were reorganized, creating 7 new districts, which further streamlined as well as sharpened the overlapping of territory as well as ethnicity. And as someone who is having a keen interest in federal designs in deeply divided societies, one of the lessons that some of these experts like Henry held talks in the context of East Europe is that when you have ethnic core regions, you have facilitated dual sovereignty. In fact, in the case of Manipur, it will not just be dual sovereignties, it could be possibilities of multiple, shared sovereignties. And unless institutional arrangement are not accommodative of this pillarized nature of deeply divided segments in Manipur, and you just continually castigate this as communal or sectarian politics without understanding, the grievances or the anxiety that people have because of the democratic deficit, because of the lack of political will to make these grassroots democratic institutions work. Such type of violent conflict are in effect inevitable, and experience in some of these deeply divided multi-ethnic societies in East Europe or in other parts of the world are, good lessons to learn from, that Manipur should not repeat the same mistake as we have, unfortunately, for the last couple of years.
I can't hear you.
Yeah. I'm asking you, Vimal sir, can't there be any other solution other than separate
Okay,
state or
let me address. I
administration?
think this is where that I tend to differ with Swan. In fact, he's
We want to
also.
hear the solution, sir. There are
Yeah,
demands
that's what I
and
said.
yeah.
That's why, your solution is based on your understanding and your presentation of what the problem is. If your conception of the problem differs, then obviously you will not meet the eyes on the solution part as well. I think as far as a symmetrical model of administration or administrative structure is concerned, there is almost an irrational and pathological institutional mechanisms which is never applied anywhere in this country, has been tested in Manipur. I'll just give you this one at this moment because the time is limited, but please mark this. It can be elaborated on this. As far as asymmetrical model of administrative structures, whatever mechanisms which has been introduced in Manipur is full of flaws and irrational, patterns are involved. Number two, when you say segmented society, deeply divided society, remember that ethnic identity is a perspective on the world. It is articulated, and that is where I invoke Sigmund Freud's narcissism of the small difference. You can keep on harping on the difference between Muslims and Hindus if you wanted to see the differences. If you want to see similarities, you can build on that as well. So I think this is a manufacturer's divide through discourses from colonial period to post-colonial structures which have been introduced. Please look into it. Nowhere in this state you have these structures like HAC. In a hill state, which is classified by the Planning Commission as a hill state, you have an idea of a hill areas and non-hill areas, which itself is an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. When you define a state as a hill state in the Planning Commission, unlike some other state like Assam, which is classified as state with hill areas, Manipur is classified as a hill state, and yet you have a concept of a hill area in hill state and a non-hill areas. This kind of a false ideas, and the manner in which you go on the ground and see how the district is organized. Anything that goes up, all the people who settle on this face of the hill goes to this area for education, for health, and for market. But this headquarter is revolved around in certain areas. Is complete lack of administrative rationale and constant manufacture of these segmented divides and prejudices. This will not help. One must find a common ground. Just as state reorganization has suggested, any form of administrative mechanism to be introduced must be guided by certain administrative rationale for the effective and efficient delivery of goods and services, and to incorporate people's participation in the governance of their life to facilitate these issues, effective and efficient delivery of goods and services, and people's participation in the governance. To facilitate these factors should be the reasoning, not on exclusivist identities, positioning in a conflictual binary sort of a discourses, which is not going to help in this country, which is what I would suggest it. And then as we move forward, I am all for decentralization of administration, revamp on the local ground, be that district councils or panchayati raj or municipal corporations. But I know from the ground, resistance comes from those in the assemblies, irrespective of the communities. This decentralization hurts their interests. And we must know this fact when you go on the ground. And unnecessarily developing and perpetuating a discourse of conflict and mistrust, using disinformations, harping on suspicions rather than understanding that there could be bridges to be built across. I think these are the two issues to go ahead. I'm all for decentralizations, but not on exclusivist identity politics. The decentralization must be guided by the rationality of effective and efficient administration and to empower the people to participate in the governance of their life. That should be the logic, not on communal identity politics. I insist that we can divide people by producing discourses and calling it deeply divided, just as the colonial forces have said that the conflict in India is very natural. Hindus and Muslims is given, is natural. They can't meet eye to eye. That's how the colonial forces have done. It's a naturalized sort of an identity, naturalized kind of a hatred among each other, rather than realizing that these are articulated positions and it is manufactured by certain structural and discursive practices of the colonial forces. We are still suffering from that one. And this is my last comment, as Afridi, I said,
No, no, no. I have one more
Northeast,
question left. This is
Northeast has
last
suffered
question on this issue.
because of this identity politics, and the energies have been wasted on this rather than galvanizing on common ground to resist this wind of extractive political economy that is sweeping across this region. And I think it is something that I would appeal to people like Swan or anybody to reduce these conflictual narratives and build up a common ground based on the dignity of everybody, and do not naturalize identities and especially conflictual binary discourses. I think this is something that I would appeal to everybody to stop doing it. It doesn't help anybody in this country.
Swansa, Swansa.
Yeah.
Very
I think
brief.
that's a major point of difference that I have with Bimol, and that's why I think the position that he takes is what I called in the social science literature is integrationist. And integration is like Bimol and others are wary of diversity or deep difference, and they want to conflate, difference to, in effect, leverage a homogeneous monochromatic society, which, in effect, unfortunately, does not square up with ground realities. And the kind of politics that we have in multi-ethnic, deeply divided societies, not just in the context of Manipur, but in the Netherlands, in Luxembourg, in Switzerland, in Canada, whatsoever, in effect, are learning experience for deeply divided societies like us, whereby asymmetrical accommodation necessarily need not be seen as conflictual because there is an element of shared rule within asymmetric. Remember that the very fact that asymmetrical institutions are about dispersal of power within the ambit of an overarching constitutional framework suggests that the element of self-ruled is sensitive enough to the self-rule aspiration of territorially mobilized communities, which need not necessarily be seen as sectarian or communal, because unless you respect and accept and acknowledge such differences, you in effect encourage integrationist policy prescription like assimilation, ethnic cleansing, genocide, or even partition of states. And I think that's precisely where I often flag myself as speaking from the vantage point of the accommodation framework. And this is replete in the literature in social science, where there is a binary drawn between accommodation framework and integration framework, and it's clear that Bimol seems to be speaking from the vantage point of the integrationist framework, where he confused, for example, decentralization with deconcentration, which essentially, when he talks about the fact that he is alive to the idea of decentralization, the idea that he has in mind is the concentration of powers. It's not decentralization. Decentralization of powers, in effect, embed constitutional provision which recognize the distinctive needs and aspiration of territorially concentrated communities. And I think this is very well within the constitutional common sense as well as constitutional scheme of things. And so long as we project such type of accommodation framework as conflict generating, I think the jury is out, because the clear evidence seems to suggest that in deeply divided societies in Spain, in Canada, or in East Europe, until and unless democracy in effect coheres with federal asymmetrical framework, in effect they stabilize and lead to peaceful constitutional change. But when there is a deliberate attempts to sidestep or even kind of bulldoze such type of accommodative institutions, the result is violent ethnic conflict. And this seems to be
Sir,
what seems to be unraveling in Manipur, very
Yeah.
unfortunately. And
Very
in that
quick.
sense, my
I just
position
have
with
a quick
Bimol
response.
is starkly opposite. And I think it should be not misconstrued as peddling a conflicting narrative, as it were.
I just wanted, no, no, I think this is not conflict. This is, as he already accepted, this is a point of departure between me and him on these issues. But I think he is missing one point. Look at the use of the word accommodation versus integrationist. There are literature which suggests the opposite of integrationist position is disintegrationist. And the territorially mobilized identities is actually what gives to ethnic cleansings. To make a certain area ethnically homogeneous is at the root of the definition of ethnic cleansings. When you're territorially mobilized and a mixed populated areas, this is what Manipur has experienced in the 90s. And you have seen what has happened now in Manipur as well. And also territorially mobilized identities is at the base of these ethnic cleansings rather than the other way around. So, you don't give a very positive by framing it as accommodation and integration. It is integrationist versus disintegrationist. It is a mixed populated area, territoriality, shared spaces. This is where you have this segmented identities as if it is a reified and territorially mobilized. You ensure that certain territory becomes ethnically homogeneous. That's what the Kuki Naga class is. That is why
yeah.
the Turan Champur is completely cleansed of the Meitei villages. And then you have this idea of a Kuki land and so forth. This is unacceptable. And there are experiences. I think he works on this area most. I know that he has been working on it for a long time. Consociational model has, you have the case of Lebanon. And you must also keep in mind the historical evolution of the identities and the political experience of people in Canada as well as in Europe is completely different from the experiences in Africa and Asia. You can't just transport those experiences here. The way the states were formed in Canada is not the same. In North America, how the state emerges and how these nation states were formed is completely different from the way, how it is formed in this part of the world. Just as the nation state, the Luxembourg experience, the Switzerland experience, all these things are different. The warning sign has already been. Lebanon is a classic case of how this kind of unthinking applications of the evolution of this institution, local specificities you don't keep in mind, then territorially mobilized identity leads to ethnic cleansing experience. Manipur has seen it in the 90s. How there's certain communities where tends to be cleansed from certain area, claiming the name of one identity, and exactly the same thing has happened now. That is a warning. So I think there are contesting ideas, and it's good that he's flagged off. But I wanted to remind him as well as he's right. I differ with him, but I'm only correcting the accommodation versus integrationist. It should be disintegrationist versus integrationist, and territorially mobilized identity. Don't fight
I,
in natural. That's the
I,
position I
I,
take it on this. I
I
agree.
think Africa, as academic, Bimol has to be mindful of the extensive literature on the debate between integration and
There were
accommodation,
some debates,
I have
please.
seen. I
I would
have
like to
seen.
request
Maybe
both of
maybe
you not
less
to
than
which
you have
debate
read.
which
because
looks
people
Quite
to
are
me,
waiting
possible.
to
which
listen
looks
Not
to
less
me
than what you have read, but I'm fairly
no,
aware
which
of
looks
the
to
limits
me
of
as
the
if
position.
he is either ignorant of the debate nor able to capture the nuances, because the position that
No,
he
no, no,
takes
sir. We are
is the kind
discussing
of
I
Manipur
think
issue.
positions, the kind of
Family
position
also,
that
please.
one.
Valerie Buns,
Take it
Valerie Buns and
easy.
other states in the context
I
of
know
East
you are a
Europe.
professor. I know you are a
And to
professor. You
suggest,
have
no,
read
Bimal,
well.
But
No, no,
No, no, no.
hold
Bimal,
Sir,
on.
let
I
us
have
avoid.
already
Let
said,
us
using
avoid.
I
This
have
is my
already
humble
said,
request to both of you.
we
Please
no,
differ.
no,
avoid the debate.
We
I
differ,
will
and do
not
not jump.
using
allow
Do not jump
both
the
of you
guns
to
by
no,
debate
saying
no,
that
with
I
each
am
other
no,
in my
ignorant or
show.
you are
So my next
smarter
no,
or
question.
you are
So
ignorant.
my
I do
next
not go
question.
to
I
that
will not
level.
allow both of you to
I
debate.
no.
base my articulation,
Sir,
whatever
I
limited it
will
is. You
not
must have read
allow
the
both
entire
of you
library in
to
the
debate.
world. It's
My
quite
humble
possible
request to both
my
of you.
reading is less
Bimal
than
sir, my
yours,
humble
but do
request to
not
you.
just wait. Afridi, let me say this. I'm not saying with anger. I'm just reminding Swan. I've told you he has worked on this for a long, long time. He might have read much more this. But when I speak as an experienced academic for 30 years, I don't speak without foundations. I have enough
No, no, no,
literatures
no.
to back up
Let's
what
move
I
on.
have
Let's
just
move
said.
on.
So keep it in that mind. We differ, but don't jump
Yeah.
into this about you are ignorant,
Sir,
you are smarter, and
No, no, no,
don't go
no,
that's
there.
no,
okay.
no,
That's
that,
It will
no,
okay.
help
you see,
Swan.
People will
I
Africa,
decide
know
who
you
will
are
Africa,
debate
smart.
most better,
You
sir.
read
no,
much more
Africa,
on this area. I have
Africa,
already admitted. But do
Swan,
not
sir,
think
please,
that
sir.
an academic
But
no,
like me
my
will speak
important that
without any
these
foundations.
two
Just keep in mind that
questions are.
much.
I think people are waiting for you
no, no,
guys.
no, Frida,
Manipur,
Frida, just a,
Manipur.
just a quick point, just a quick point. You see, when we reflect academic debates, you know, one of the ways that we reflect debates is we use some of these, cases which work and cases which don't work. The case of Lebanon is a failed consociational model. And the very fact that Bimol used this to castigate aspirations on the very whole academic framework of accommodation is, I think, a bit
You are
unacceptable.
still
And I think
conflating
that's
it
precisely
here.
my
I
problem is,
said
and
I
I'm
have
not
already
reading,
said
no, because
my
that's, can I finish?
effect. No, no, no. I think you are dragging this. I'm
Can I
trying to
just,
avoid.
no,
I'm trying to
no,
avoid.
No, no,
can I
sir,
No,
just
no.
please
finish
I'm
my
avoid this.
trying
point?
to avoid.
So
If
my
The
next
point,
this
question.
is something
So
the
my
like
point
next
I
is,
have
question.
already
Viewers are
said.
watching this.
I
I
the
have
will
point
already
kindly.
is,
said. I
So
have
my
already
humble
said it.
request. No, sir, I will not
When
allow.
I
So my
speak,
humble
I have
request to
certain
you is
foundations, certain
my next
readings,
question.
and I have
Vimal
given
sir,
you the
please.
example of the
No, no,
evolution
no,
of
no.
the
Vimal
nation
sir.
state and
Vimal
institution
sir,
mechanism.
please.
Please hold on, Afridi. You should
Please,
either
sir.
no,
rein in, I run it properly. I have
No.
already withdrawn, I have said it. Do not do this.
Okay,
You
done.
should not
no,
Let's
allow
end
your
this.
force to
Let
cast
some
aspersion. I've
Manipur.
already said.
Sir, let us talk about Manipur
no,
now.
I
no,
have
no,
said it.
Manipur is
Let's talk about it differently.
the modus vivendi is a set of readings are totally different.
okay.
I, I,
Anyways,
I think I know
Manipur, sir,
whatever you read
this is
is
very
serving your
important.
own sectarian
Sir,
and disintegrationist project. That's what you have been doing.
No,
I'm
that,
reminding
no,
you that
no,
that
no,
experience of the state
that again,
formation
that
in
again,
Asia any
Swan,
that,
political
sir.
scientist in this world will know that the
that
formation of the
again,
state in Asia is different from that of the Europe and the North America. And the
that
models that you
again,
talk about Europe is not
It's okay.
necessarily going to be true or in tune with the experience in South Asia. That
that
is
again,
Sir,
everybody
so
understand. And if you think
please
that
go on to
otherwise,
again,
the
it's
next
your
question. I will
choice.
not allow. Please, sir. Please, this is my humble request to both of you. You
no,
both
that
of
again
us,
is unfortunate.
you both are the professors.
So
Please, this
don't
is
do
my
that.
humble request.
So you should know
Let us.
that when once have already gently
I
reminded
know,
that
I know.
you
Yeah,
have been working on this area, but do not jump guns and a professional academic like will speak
right.
without
So
any
I,
basis. That's
sir,
all.
No,
please, this
no,
is
no,
my humble.
I
So
do
let's
have a
move on
point.
to
The
the
point
next
is,
question. My
our
question
readings
is
are totally different.
Manipur is now geographically
Let's go
divided
on to the next question
between
and
the
wind it
two
up.
communities with borders that resemble international border. Don't you foresee a situation when a Meitei and a Kuki mingle again like brothers and sisters, and can't civil society group take steps towards it? And or is it that they seem to further adding fuel to the fire?
Can I
So
come
this is
in?
very important question.
Can I
So
come in?
yeah,
I think to this the response to this would be quite simple as well as straightforward, which Santal move in a different dialogue on democracy or democratic difference, flag it in terms of dialogue between dialogue as agonistic side or as antagonistic side, right? So if we treat our fellow citizens as possible friends with whom we can differ as well as have a dissenting opinion about. We accept as well as acknowledge the difference in the narrative foundation and not necessarily demonize them. I think there is a promise that democratic deliberations have possibilities of building trust, building of fraternity, building of solidarity as well as unity. But when the contrary happens, when you lampooned the whole chunk of population by chief case to suit and tarnish the whole communities with all sort of calling names, then you possibly leverage the space of what we call antagonistic dialogue, right? So democracy, in effect, is not well when you consider your fellow citizens as your enemies with whom you have irreconcilable difference. But in the case of Manipur, I'm still confident that despite all this rupture that happens, despite the persistent targeting as well as a lot of miscalculated political decisions that have already taken, I'm still hopeful that the communities on both sides of the divide would have sense, would begin to respect each other as possible friends, even if in the event of the worst eventuality of separation, still live as friendly neighbors, right? So I think that should be the spirit, and this is the kind of in effect dialogic space that I believe in. I believed in trust, in mutual respect, and in the spirit of accommodation, as well as acknowledgement, as well as acceptance of deep diversity as well as difference across the board. And it might be different contexts that we use as a conceptual lens to make sense of the kind of complex situation that obtains in Manipur. But still, the spirit remains that we are different, but we can be united. But unity does not necessarily means that we all the time share the same administrative political roof. Like we can be different states, we can also be different administrative territories, but that does not mean that the possibility of bridging communities through relationship, through friendly ties, through other administrative linkages is totally broken. So I still believe that dialogue has the full capacity as well as potentiality of building trust, building confidence, in so much as it also invoke the spirit of mutual respect. In the absence of this, unfortunately, the whole democratic exercise would be one of antagonistic kind, which is totally unhealthy for a democratic culture and socialization, which is in effect amenable to the idea of unity, of trust, and legitimacy of the state.
Sir, Bimal sir.
Couple of things very quickly. Fida, the problem of the crisis in Manipur is that you have allowed it to linger on for so long. The conflict has gone to the societal level. If you only have these issues only in the contestation of the politics, that would have been simpler. But it has unfortunately allowed to percolate down to the community level, in the societal level. So it's not going to be easy. But as the in the Hindi saying also, you have no mushkil hai, namumkin nahi hai, as we said. No, it's difficult, but not impossible. We can turn it around. But there has to be certain element of honesty in our approach. And when I say, for example, the empowering people to participate in the governance, and as far as people are complaining about differential development and lack of access to the wealth and services of the state, I said that decentralization must address these aspirations by empowering them to take part in the governance of their life and also the delivery of goods and services. But you don't brush it aside by saying that it's to bulldoze and negate the aspiration. That's contradictory in terms. So my suggestion is that the common ground must be found out. But as long as you keep on producing these identities, I've already said I take this position as many scholars who studied ethnic conflict. Ethnicity or ethnic identity is a perspective on the world. It is an articulated praxis, and we must be changing these things. These praxis and these discourses must be changed. But constantly producing this conflictual identities and naturalize, reifies, essentialize this identity is not going to help. So I believe that once we understand certain foundational issues about the problem, I'm very hopeful. For one thing, remember that it's absolutely nonsensical to say that the Kukis or Meiteis can't live together. As long as you are a citizen of this country, you will be working together either in the army or in the air force or in the institutions, universities, and so on. I do have my students, whom I protect and take care of it as my word. And it is absolute nonsense that you can't live together. Simply, you skip on harping on this dialogue, we can't live together, just to achieve certain political project, essentialize these identities, and blame game continuously pursued without addressing the fact that the state has failed. And then when you even talk about state, you try to communalize that debate. I think that's the unfortunate part of the
So
story.
I would like
Once
to
we
add just
understood
one question,
this,
sir. Yeah,
just wait.
I would
Once
just
we
like to add
understood
one
this,
question. Yeah.
once we understood this, it may be difficult, but I'm pretty sure that we'll come around. It may take longer, but definitely. But I think the honesty of purpose and sincerity of approach must back up our approaches. Otherwise, it will
Three.
make it more difficult.
So three suggestion to government of India to end this violence immediate.
I have said this many times on national TV. The
So,
government
but
must
not
first of
in
all
answer.
rein in the violence once. They must rein in the violence. Rid of the state must work, number one. And they must do. I think it is, these political parties are involved still. I said if the prime minister called these ministers and MLAs of his party and said, people are losing life, what you guys are doing, sit down and talk. There's one approach. They could have done a long time back. I've said this on national media. And they could have done a track to, I think Swan himself was suggested, people like Ratan Thiam could be a player. I said Nikitu Iralu and people like Janu Barua from the regions can play a role to talk about it. But I think there are certain issues of injustice must be addressed. And when we talk about injustice, remember that it's not only about the familiar tribal and so on and so forth. Meiteis have genuine grievances, and that must be addressed. There are historical injustices being done to the Meiteis as a community as well. That must be addressed. And you know that peace is not the mere absence of violence. It is fundamentally founded on justice. So justice must be done to every community, and everybody should be able to live with sense of dignity and well-being. And we must be working towards that one.
Yeah. Swan sir, three
Uh,
suggestions to government of India to end this violence and what are the
I,
long-term solutions?
I think it's difficult to spell out, but it has to be multi-pronged and it has to be simultaneous. It cannot be piecemeal. And one of the ways that the Indian state can do possibly is to end the major source of this structural violence, which is to allow armed militias on both sides of the divide to dictate terms to democratic institution and elected leaders of the state, right? Secondly, I think the state should stop its partisan role, because there are extensive reports of partisan role of the state in this violence. The state should be seen as even-handed and protecting the rule of law. And when I mean the rule of law, it means that the state should guarantees that there is equal protection of the law as well as equality before the law, and that the state in effect should eliminate possibilities of mass stereotyping or demonization of a particular community with unacceptable calling of names, and thought that the state should have trust and legitimacy. And this trust and legitimacy can only happen when people are given effective voice and participation in the way democratic institutions function. And I think these are some of the important things that I think need to be seriously thought of by the state and immediately roll out in order to address and tackle this violence.
So you can see that the stark difference remain on both the sides regarding the Manipur issue. Today, through this discussion, we have tried to delve into the issue and made an effort to engage in a meaningful conversation, not to debate, but to discuss a way towards the possibility achieving a solution. The people of Manipur have suffered enough in the past 9 months. Now, a solution is highly required to give them a breathing space. A state like Manipur has tremendous potential given its strategic location, and hence a cycle of violence and distrust cannot be led to ruin the potential. Let us hope with today's discussion an effort has been made to pave the road towards achieving a solution. And last, not but and last, But not the least, if you like the content here on India Today Any, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And also share this video as much as possible. Thank you, both of you, for joining us. Good night.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Afrida. My pleasure.
Swan, send me some more literatures on the Asymmetry Federation. I want to read. You do passing on. You keep on passing on to others, not to me.